Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly into the dusty corridors of an ancient Indian medical school, where surgery wasn't something you feared, but something you practiced using fruit, wax, and ants. Yes, ants. You're waking up in Takshashila, a vibrant city humming somewhere around 600 BCE in what is now modern-day Pakistan. The sun hasn't yet clawed over the red horizon, but already the air is thick and warm, like an old blanket someone forgot to shake out. Birds are arguing in the banyan trees. Merchants are already yelling about turmeric. And you, lucky you, are about to observe your first surgical lesson. The walls of the surgical school are made from sun-dried bricks, and the scent inside is a curious mix of ghee, burnt neem leaves, and sandalwood ash. Outside, a herd of goats is aggressively disrespecting the herb garden. Inside, your fellow students are half asleep, wrapped in rough cotton robes, sipping warm barley water to wake up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, post your location and what time it is where you're listening from. I love knowing where in the world you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The man at the center of the courtyard isn't just anyone. He's rumored to have trained under Sushruta himself, the legendary father of surgery. His voice is calm, almost sleepy, but his hands are steady. He holds up a lotus stalk and begins slicing it slowly, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. This is your scalpel for the day. You practice the motion yourself. The stalk resists gently, like cutting a thick cucumber, but the teacher says the wrist must flow like water. You try again, still more like jam than water. He sighs, pats your shoulder, and moves on. Around you, apprentices are kneeling with solemn reverence over gourds filled with colored dye. Each gourd simulates a wound or organ. Someone misjudges a cut, and a stream of indigo liquid splashes onto their tunic. They look up sheepishly. Another day, another pretend spleen lost. The philosophy here is one of gentle precision. You aren't taught to hack or force. You're taught to listen, to your breath, your patient's breath, and the resistance of whatever's under your fingers. It's less battlefield triage, more meditative craft. You overhear one student whisper that his cousin once had cataract surgery under a neem tree, performed by a traveling surgeon with hands that smelled like ghee and sandalwood. Apparently, it worked. Historians still argue whether these early ophthalmological procedures were common or just rare flashes of brilliance, passed down like oral spells. Meanwhile, in the shade, a boy fans an open wound with a palm frond. It's not for cooling. It's to keep flies away. Your teacher murmurs something about maggots being both curse and cure. You try not to think too hard about that. In the city beyond the walls, incense rises lazily from temple towers, and ox carts creak across stone roads. But here, within this clay courtyard, it's all quiet focus. You lean against the wall, watching a group prepare a surgical tray. Ivory scalpel, a scoop made from bamboo, and a cloth bundle with something squirming inside. You'll meet those squirmers soon enough. In this moment, you feel the weight of the place. Takshashila isn't just a city, it's a living textbook. Greek, Persian, and Chinese students all gather here, sharing ideas about medicine, astronomy, and which fruits are best eaten after 2 p.m. You glance at the students beside you. One's from Gandhara, another from Varanasi. They both look nervous but determined. As the morning stretches on, the heat grows denser, but no one complains. You're too busy threading hair through the eye of a bone needle, or trying to memorize the 7 layers of skin your teacher insists are real. He pokes you gently and recites, Avabhasini Lohita, Shweta, Tamra. You nod along. By layer 5, you've already forgotten layer 2. Still, you're here. In this moment, watching sweat bead on a surgeon's brow as he seals a wound with surprising calm, isn't just a museum exhibit. It's alive. It breathes. And it's only the beginning. You're sitting now on a worn reed mat in the shade of the neem tree, the air thick with the hum of cicadas and the smell of warm dust. The surgical master sets down a bundle wrapped in red cloth. Everyone leans in a little. What's inside isn't a gleaming scalpel or a set of bronze forceps. It's a scattering of everyday items that wouldn't look out of place in a kitchen. A length of hollow bamboo, a sharp thorn from mimosa tree, a spool of silk thread spun by village worms, a sliver of volcanic glass, and a small clay pot covered with a wooden lid. No steel, no gleaming cromtras, just nature, refined through calm hands and generations of whispered instruction. You shift slightly as the instructor opens the pot. It holds a dark, herbal paste, part antiseptic, part prayer. The surgeon dips a sliver of reed into it and paints a line across a strip of leather, demonstrating where the incision should be made. The cut must not go deeper than a mustard seed's thickness, he says quietly. You suspect mustard seeds have never been properly measured, but you nod solemnly anyway. Beside you, another student lays out her tools. Her blade is a single obsidian shard, thin as paper and wickedly sharp. Historians still argue whether these surgeons truly used volcanic glass, or whether this practice has been confused with other ancient cultures like the Aztecs. But here, in this dusty square, no one questions it. The obsidian cuts clean. That's what matters. You're told that every tool has a personality. Bamboo is flexible but blunt. Thorns are sharp but unpredictable. Even ants, yes. They'll come up again soon. Must be handled with a certain bedside manner. At the corner of the courtyard, a group is practicing cauterization. Not on people, yet, but on thick leaves of the banyan tree. A red-hot rod is pressed against the leaf surface, releasing a faint hiss and curl of smoke. You wince reflexively. The instructor merely raises an eyebrow. If the tree can take it, so can your patient, he says. Not exactly reassuring. A boy next to you has been tasked with shaping a bone hook from the rib of a small goat. It's not going well. The bone keeps splintering, and his knife slips dangerously close to his thumb. The master nods approvingly. Better here than on someone's stomach. The tools here are simple but not crude. They demand patience, precision, and respect. A curved reed, once smooth and hollowed, becomes a catheter. A porcupine quill, properly sharpened, can probe an abscess. Even fish scales have been used to lift debris from a wound. You start to see why this place, despite its lack of metal and antiseptics, produced healers with remarkable results. A student carries in a gourd with a simulated ulcer. A foul-smelling mix of goat's milk and fermented rice oozes from atop. Always practice draining without bursting the surrounding tissue, the instructor says calmly. Pretend the patient is a prince, or your mother. He hands you a tool made of ivory, shaped like a tiny canoe. This is your scoop. You breathe slowly and press in. It's slipperier than you expected. A quiet giggle escapes from someone nearby. Too shallow, they whisper. You try again. Slower this time. Deeper. The fermented goo lets out a quiet gurgle. A wince-worthy detail, yes, but surprisingly effective practice. Someone asks why metal isn't more common in the toolkit. The teacher shrugs. Metal rusts. It angers the gods of the blood. You're not entirely sure if that's metaphor or medicine, but you jot it down anyway. You're beginning to understand the elegance of it all. These tools aren't just cobbled together. They're adapted, tuned, refined by centuries of trial and error, guided by Ayurveda's principles of balance and flow. This isn't butchery. It's a conversation with the body, the patient, the materials, and yes, even with ants. The morning sun climbs higher, the air warming into a fragrant stew of sweat, herbs, and curiosity. A tiny bronze bell rings, signaling the end of the session. You gather your tools and walk slowly across the courtyard. One of your peers leans over and whispers, "Tomorrow, we use the ants." You smile. Somehow that feels like progress. You wake the next morning to the rhythmic squeak of a water wheel and the low, steady chant of a temple hymn rising over the rooftops. The city of Takshashila stretches lazily beneath a hazy blue sky. And the promise of ants, yes, ants, hangs in the air like spice on the breeze. Back at the surgical courtyard, the red cloth bundle has been replaced with a shallow ceramic bowl. Inside it, a tangle of thin black ants scurries across each other, their bodies sleek, mandibles twitching. They look like ordinary ants. They are not. These are cry ants, prized for their impressively large jaws and their ability to, well, obey. Mostly. A senior student leans down and murmurs, "They stitch better than most of us." He isn't joking. Today's lesson is on suturing, specifically how to close wounds using live ants. You can't help but stare. This is the day you've been both dreading and oddly excited for. The master enters without ceremony and unwraps a strip of leather, freshly sliced and dyed with red clay. It's meant to simulate human skin. Next to it, a bowl of cold water and a piece of ghee-soaked cloth. "You only need 6 ants," he says, "but bring 8. 2 will panic." You're handed a slender pair of bamboo tongs and encouraged to be gentle, but firm, like coaxing a prince out of bed. The ant catches between the tips, its legs flailing. You guide its mandibles to the edge of the wound, and just as it bites, pinching both sides together with surprising strength, you snap off its body, leaving the head clamped in place. You pause. Wait, what? Yes, that's the method. Ants are applied alive, and then their bodies are removed, leaving their heads locked in place, acting as natural clips. This was a practiced and respected technique, especially useful when silk or thread wasn't available, or the wound was in a sensitive place. Historians still argue whether this technique was widespread in India or borrowed from other indigenous practices, like those seen among tribes in South America. But here, in Takshashila, it's taken as surgical gospel. You practice it again and again. Soon, the row of tiny ant heads clamped along the leather strip begins to resemble a grotesque little zipper. There's something mesmerizing about it. Horrifying? Slightly, but also precise, even elegant. You catch the eye of another student across the circle. She's got an ant dangling from her tongs, looking as unimpressed as an insect can. She mutters, "This one's got stage fright," before gently placing it on the wound. It bites clean. Success. Elsewhere, a student shrieks quietly as an ant escapes up their sleeve. The instructor doesn't flinch. Good. This is also a lesson in calm. There's a logic here that goes beyond survival improvisation. Ant heads, it turns out, maintain grip for hours, even days, before naturally loosening. No stitching, no tying off, just a row of bio-clamps, placed with ritualistic care. The ants are a bridge between nature and medicine, between ritual and biology. Of course, they aren't the only option. The instructor moves on to the second part of the day, thread sutures. You're handed a spool of thread made from cotton and boiled in a decoction of turmeric and neem. It's naturally antibacterial. The needle, meanwhile, is shaped from bone. Its eye smoothed with oil to keep it from fraying the thread. You try stitching a banana peel first, then a goat hide. Your fingers ache from the awkward angles. You stab yourself twice. Not ideal, but you notice something. The wounds, fake as they are, begin to close with more grace. The instructor explains, the body heals, but the hands must not interrupt it. You think about that as you stitch. Someone asks about sterilization. The answer? Sunlight, smoke, and prayers. A few tools are passed through open flame. Others are doused in pungent oils that burn the eyes, but supposedly cleanse the blade. Historians debate whether these methods were truly effective or just spiritual rituals layered over the science. But the infection rates, at least according to ancient texts, were surprisingly low. By midday, your hands smell of turmeric, ant, and goat. You're exhausted, proud, a little unsettled. The final task is to remove the ant heads. One by one, using tweezers carved from horn, you lift them away. Most come off easily. A few resist. That's loyalty. Your instructor jokes. You step back and look at the leather strip. It's not beautiful, but sealed, held together by nature and steady hands. And that here is enough. As the sun dips low and casts golden shadows across the clay walls, you wipe your palms on your robe. You just learned it too. 500-year-old medical technique that modern science still finds strange, but not necessarily wrong. Unts. Who knew? The next morning arrives with a slow, amber sunrise and the distant cry of a peacock, somehow both regal and ridiculous. You rise, stretch your aching back, and think, yesterday I sutured fake wounds with ants. And today, you dissect. Not a human, thank the stars. You're not quite there yet. But a goat, prepared respectfully, lies in the center of the courtyard, draped with damp cloths to keep it supple. The scent is agricultural, a mix of hay, salt, and something vaguely metallic. You suppress a gag and focus. Dissection here isn't seen as grim or disrespectful. It's a sacred practice, a way to understand the dance of Veda, Pitta, and Kapha, the three dashas that govern the body according to Ayurvedic principles. The physical form is not merely meat, it's an echo of the universe. The instructor doesn't begin with a dramatic incision. He starts by asking everyone to sit in silence for a full minute. The body once moved, he says. You must remember that. Then, gently, he parts the skin with an obsidian blade, so sharp it doesn't tear, it glides. You lean in as the first layer peels away, revealing a crosshatch of fat and muscle. This, the master says, is msa. Strength, motion, warmth. Without it, we are cloth stuffed with straw. Historians still argue whether these dissections were frequent, rare, or even strictly legal. Some sources suggest they were only allowed on those who died in specific ways, like drowning or lightning strike. But here in this imagined courtyard, the practice is accepted, even revered. You're handed a tool shaped like a miniature rake, used to tease apart muscle fibers. The resistance is strange, like trying to comb cooked noodles. A student next to you mumbles, I thought this would be more like a scroll drawing. You nod. The body is messier than ink ever shows. The liver is exposed, dark, smooth, enormous. This is the seat of Pitta, the master notes. Anger lives here. Also bile. You try not to dwell on your own liver. Someone asks about the brain. The master's eyebrows lift. Brains are overrated, he says dryly, earning a few sleepy chuckles. We prefer to study breath and blood. The mind is just a confused wind. Despite the sarcasm, a student brings out a gourd carved to resemble a human skull. Inside, he's packed grains soaked in oil to mimic gray matter. It's part joke, part training model. You shake it slightly, it sloshes ominously. Don't do that, the model owner warns. He's sensitive. There's a moment of tension as the chest cavity is opened. You're expecting something grand. Instead, it's just ribs and a heavy thump of organs, loosely tethered by tissue that clings like wet silk. A heart-shaped muscle sits stubbornly under the breastbone. The daya, the master says, where rhythm lives, and regret. You don't ask what he means, but you note the weight of that statement. You move on to the intestines. They are vast, ridiculously so, coiled and looped and wriggling even in death. Digestion. Herbs, she clarifies, holding up a pouch of asafoetida she'd been sniffing to dull the smell. The tension breaks. Laughter. Relief. You've now touched almost every part of this goat except the eyes. And that's next. Using a rounded bronze scoop, you're instructed to remove the left eye gently. Do not pop it, the master warns. The spirit of the goat may be offended. You assume he's kidding. Mostly, the eye comes free with a moist slurp. It stares at you, bulbous and glistening. You place it on a tray lined with lotus leaves. A single ant wanders nearby. You wonder if it stitched something in a past life. Dissection ends with a cleansing ritual. You smear a bit of turmeric on your hands, wash them with river water, and whisper a short mantra for gratitude. You don't know all the words yet, but the rhythm is comforting. Before you leave, the instructor holds up a preserved lung in a jar. Breath is the first medicine, he says. If you understand how we breathe, you'll understand how we live. You walk home in silence, the anatomy still vivid behind your eyes. That night, as you drift towards sleep, your dreams are full of spiraling intestines, pulsing hearts, and curious ants in surgical gowns. Medicine, you're beginning to realize, is far weirder and more wonderful than you ever imagined. Why now, you've grown oddly accustomed to the scent of boiled herbs, goat leather, and sun-warmed clay. Your robe is stiff with turmeric stains. Your fingers smell faintly of neem. And yet, you're starting to feel like a real student of ancient medicine. Today's lesson is about pain. Not experiencing it, thankfully, but understanding it, describing it, and ideally treating it. In a world without ibuprofen, anesthesia, or even the polite distance of modern terminology, pain is personal, and everyone has their own theory about where it comes from. You're back in the courtyard, cross-legged with the others, listening as the master holds up a flat clay tablet etched with human figures and tiny Sanskrit inscriptions. It looks like a game board. It's not. This is where it hurts. He begins. He taps points across the body, shoulder, temple, hip, gut, and here's what it means. In ancient Indian medical texts, like the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, pain isn't just physical, it's elemental. A pounding headache? Too much pitta, the fire dasha. Aching joints? That's veda, the wind, out of balance. Bloating? The fault lies with kapha, the earth-water mix that governs, among other things, mucus. Yes, ancient India was very mucus-aware. You're handed a palm leaf scroll with illustrations of people in various positions of agony. Some look cartoonish. One man is grimacing while being stung by a bee the size of a puppy. Another holds his belly as if it just made a poor dietary decision involving raw lentils. But then the master moves on to treatments. The first, and most entertaining, is leech therapy. A bowl of glossy, writhing leeches is passed around. The instructor lets one crawl onto his wrist. They seek imbalance, he says, eyes twinkling. They're more accurate than some of you. You're not entirely sold. A student beside you whispers, "Do you think they name them?" Another replies, "Mine's called Gary." Despite your doubts, the theory holds water. Bloodletting, in a controlled fashion, was believed to balance the dashas, especially in inflammatory conditions. And leeches? Surprisingly gentle. Next comes the Sharadhara demonstration, the practice of slowly dripping warm oil over the forehead. The setup looks like a spa treatment. A brass pot swings gently above a volunteer's brow, releasing a thin stream of medicated oil directly onto the third eye region. You try it yourself. The oil is warm, fragrant with brahmi and sandalwood. As it pours in rhythmic waves, you feel oddly floaty. Not asleep, not awake, just suspended. Pain can be drowned, the master says softly, but never scolded. Historians still argue whether Sharadhara was purely medicinal or had spiritual roots. Many modern practitioners say it helps with anxiety and sleep. Ancient texts, meanwhile, describe it as taming the monkey of the mind. You think that's fair? Your mental monkey is currently very mellow. After lunch, mung dal and sour mango, you return for a more intense lesson. Cross suture, the medicated thread therapy used to treat fistulas and hemorrhoids. It's not pretty, but it's genius. A cotton thread is soaked in alkaline herbal paste, usually containing ingredients like turmeric, arca, and apamarga. Then, it's inserted into the affected tract and tied loosely. Over days, it slowly cuts through the tissue while disinfecting it. You watch the demonstration on a wax model shaped like an unfortunate buttock. The thread is threaded with surgical elegance, looped like a lazy shoelace. The thread does the work, the master explains. You merely encourage it. You're still wrapping your head around the fact that someone invented this 2,000 years ago, and it still works today. Modern proctologists, bless their hearts, have studied cross-suture and found it startlingly effective. Just a bit medieval-looking. A student leans over. So we got ants for skin, thread for butts, and leeches for everything else. You nod. Don't forget the oil hats. Pain, as you now understand, was not merely a curse to be endured. It was a message, a misalignment, a chance to restore harmony, using what the world already offered: plants, oils, metals, even bugs. The day ends with a meditation. You sit beneath the shade of a neem tree, instructed to breathe in, visualize your organs, and thank them for not falling out. The wind rustles the leaves. Somewhere a goat sneezes. You exhale slowly. Your back hurts from sitting all day, But instead of wincing, you whisper, "Ah, my Veda is clearly misbehaving." You're learning. Tonight, your dreams are sticky. Not metaphorically, literally sticky. You're being chased through a jungle by a giant walking salve jar labeled Mystery Bomb. And it's got the face of your anatomy instructor. When you wake up, groggy and disoriented, you can still smell the camphor. Why? Because today's lesson is all about ointments, poultices, and potions. The unguents and goos that ancient Indian surgeons used to soothe, treat, or sometimes just distract from bodily distress. The morning starts in the herb courtyard, where you're tasked with grinding your own paste. Your tools are simple: a flat stone slab, silbata, and a cylindrical roller. You kneel beside a pile of roots, powders, and leaves labeled in looping Brahmi script. Your first assignment? Make a pain-relieving poultice using turmeric, castor leaves, and a curious black goo called gugulu. The texture is somewhere between peanut butter and old candle wax. It smells righteous, like a forest that recently got into a fight with a beehive. As you begin mashing ingredients, the master hovers behind you and asks, "Do you know what Crayalepa is?" You freeze. "No," you admit. He smiles. "It's a paste used to calm angry skin. Also works on angry mothers-in-law." You're not sure if he's joking. Probably not. The Sushruta Samhita outlines over 700 medicinal plants and dozens of topical formulas. Many are surprisingly advanced: antiseptics, anti-inflammatories, even mild anesthetics. Neem oil, for instance, is used for almost everything: cuts, coughs, lice, rashes, social awkwardness, you name it. You move on to piku therapy, soaking a cotton pad in warm oil and pressing it onto a sore joint. It's simple but effective. Like feeding the knee a midnight snack, the assistant jokes. Historians still argue whether these treatments were reserved for the elite or widely accessible. Some evidence suggests village healers carried traveling apothecaries, little carts filled with salves and seeds. Others say wealthy patients received more complex multi-herb treatments, sometimes imported from distant kingdoms. Either way, one thing is clear: ancient India smelled intense. As you finish grinding a paste made of sandalwood and rosewater, a student nearby leans over and whispers, "I heard they used cow dung as a wound sealant." You nod. "Yeah, it's antiseptic." They grimace. "Still, EW." Then comes the fun part: tasting. Because in Ayurveda, what goes on the skin often goes in the mouth, too. You're handed a teaspoon of triphala, a mixture of 3 dried fruits ground into a bitter powder. For digestion, you're told. You place it on your tongue. Immediate regret. It tastes like someone ground up disappointment and anxiety and dusted it with pepper. One student makes the mistake of laughing while tasting it and ends up coughing violently. The instructor doesn't flinch. "He is purging Veda," he says solemnly. The session moves indoors for decoction preparation. Over low coals, brass pots simmer with strange brews: licorice root, cinnamon bark, cracked peppercorns, dried ginger. The room smells like a haunted chai stall. You're told to stir counterclockwise. Always counterclockwise. Clockwise invites haste. The master warns, and haste leads to diarrhea. Another student accidentally reverses direction. Everyone gasps theatrically. He immediately starts fanning his pot, as if to reverse fate. "Too late," someone whispers. The bowels have been informed. Laughter breaks the seriousness. Even among medicine, there's room for jokes. Then comes medicated ghee, clarified butter infused with herbs. It's stored in palm leaf containers and labeled by condition: sleep, anxiety, memory, and one ambiguously titled mental overheating. You taste a drop of the sleep version. It's warm, rich, slightly bitter. You yawn almost immediately. "That's not the ghee," someone says. "That's just how boring today's been." Fair. As the afternoon shadows stretch long across the courtyard, your final task is applying a burn salve. A brick warmed by the sun becomes your patient. You slather it with aloe, honey, and turmeric, then wrap it gently in a cloth. It's surprisingly satisfying. You pat the brick like a bandaged puppy. At day's end, The instructor stands before a wall of clay jars. Each one is labeled in careful script, some over 200 years old. This, he says, is our pharmacy. It remembers more than I do. You're given a small tin to take home. A mild balm for sore muscles and mosquito bites. You open it in your hut, inhale the scent, camphor, basil, lemongrass, and feel your thoughts slow. Outside, a breeze rustles the banana leaves. Somewhere, a leech sighs in a bowl of rice water. And you, student of the sticky arts, curl up in your blanket, knowing the world has always had its strange remedies. Your dreams tonight are all herbs and honey, though you wake up inexplicably convinced you've been licensed as a goat chiropractor. Don't overthink it. This morning, the air carries the scent of copper and soot. It's surgery day. Again. But today's lesson doesn't involve ants or buttered threads. No, today is about tools. Not just what they are, but how they were made, held, and wielded by hands steady enough to cut open flesh, yet gentle enough not to offend a king's delicate dignity. You enter the workshop, where the walls are lined with shelves stacked full of curious instruments. They glint softly in the morning light. Forceps shaped like bird beaks, probes as thin as hairpins, hooks, scoops, scalpels, each one with a Sanskrit name longer than your attention span. There are 101 of them in total, all listed in the Sushruta Samhita, and each has a specific task. Welcome, the master surgeon says, holding up a blade with a curve so precise it might have been measured by moonlight. This, he announces, is the Mandalagra. It separates tissue like gossip divides friends. You stifle a laugh. A good sign. You're still awake. You're handed your first real surgical replica, a bronze knife no bigger than a quill. The handle is wrapped in cotton thread, not for grip, but for balance. It feels unexpectedly elegant, like it should be carving poetry into tree bark. The master gestures to a wax model of a human torso. Incision practice, he says. No second chances. Pretend it screams. You do your best. Your line is clean, but shallow. He nods. Good. You did not insult the wax. A key point in Sushruta's method is simulation before application. Students weren't allowed near real patients until they'd trained extensively on gourds, clay models, animal carcasses, and yes, leather bags filled with fluids that mimic blood and pus. The goal? Predict everything. Surgeons, he says, must never be surprised. You learn to use the Vrihimika Shastra, a lancet designed to drain abscesses. Swift, then soothe, the mantra goes. You cut, and then immediately apply a cooling herb paste. No one wants to be sliced by surprise and then left to simmer like yesterday's lentils. Nearby, someone fumbles the Ankush, an elephant goad sometimes repurposed to pull out foreign objects. It clangs to the floor, drawing a sharp look. That, the master mutters, is why you will not operate on royalty. Historians still argue whether Sushruta's surgical kits were common or only reserved for elite physicians. Bronze instruments have been found dating back to at least 600 BCE in India, some almost identical to modern tools. One scalpel even bears were marks consistent with bone surgeries. Others wonder how sterilization was handled. Smoke? Boiling? Magic? Possibly all three. You pause at a table where a junior student is assembling a surgery bag. There's a meticulous ritual to it. Instruments are wrapped in cloth soaked with herbal oils, camphor, neem, or myrrh. Everything is laid in a sequence based on the surgery type. Eye, skin, abdomen, rectal. Oh yes, we're going there eventually. The instructor notes, surgery begins not with cutting, but with the mind. You must think through every motion before the blade moves. You feel the pressure now? The tools are delicate, yes, but so are the stakes. A missed angle could be the difference between healing and, well, poetic eulogy. Next comes the lesson on cauterization. You expect drama. What you get is craft. The metal rods are heated until they glow amber, then cooled briefly in medicated oil. The resulting hiss is both terrifying and soothing. This, the master says, is how we stop bleeding, or start healing, depending on the day. You're allowed to press a hot rod into a slab of goat meat. The smell isn't great. Still, you're surprised by the precision. The tool leaves a clean dot, no splatter, no mess. Fire heals where herbs fail, the saying goes. Comforting. There's even a lecture on non-metal tools. You learn of sharpened bamboo slivers used for incisions in certain villages, and of obsidian-like stones ground to microscopic edges. One is so sharp it's nicknamed the whispering blade. You shiver just imagining it. Before sunset, you're invited to a final challenge. Identify 10 tools by shape alone. You're blindfolded. Someone hands you a slender hook with a spiral handle. Verdipitra, you say. Correct. Next, a small loop probe. Shalaka. Very good. Then a heavy item that feels like a soup ladle. Is this for brain extraction? Laughter erupts. No. The assistant says. That's the lunch ladle. Fair enough. By the end of the day, you've nicked yourself twice, drawn an almost straight incision on wax liver, and correctly identified 7 of the tools by touch. The master nods. Not bad for someone who still cringes at leeches. You return to your quarters sore but proud. In your hands, the weight of a small bronze blade. Not sharp enough to cut, but enough to remind you that precision, not force, is what separates butchers from healers. Outside, the stars are rising like slow sparks from the horizon. You lie back, imagining them as the ancient surgeon's lamps, lighting 1,000 quiet procedures long forgotten. You wake up in the middle of the night with the sudden, irrational fear that someone is about to test you on Sanskrit anatomical terms. Relax. It's just your brain trying to file away all the knowledge you've stuffed into it. Today's lesson takes you deep into the pages of the Sushruta, Samhita again. But now we shift from tools to technique, from bronze to flesh. Specifically, this morning's focus is on reconstructive surgery, a field where ancient Indian surgeons were centuries ahead of their time. As the sun rises and the compound hums to life, your instructor greets you with the phrase, "Today we make noses." You blink, as in sculpt them, as in attach them. He replies, already walking. You arrive at a quiet operating platform under a fig tree. It's shaded and breezy, ideal for delicate work. Laid out on a table are strips of cotton, clay models, and fresh banana leaves. Nearby sits a lifelike dummy with an unsettlingly absent nose. It turns out ancient India had a rather robust demand for nasal reconstruction. Reasons varied. War injuries, punishments, cutting off the nose was a common sentence for crimes like adultery. And infections. So Sushruta developed rhinoplasty techniques that were, frankly, astonishing. The method used skin from the patient's cheek or forehead, which would be partially detached, rotated downward, and sutured into place over the nasal cavity. Think of it like a living, flipping skin flap. You practice the motion on a lump of cowhide soaked overnight in ghee. It's disturbingly realistic. One of the senior students demonstrates the full process, shaping the nasal cavity with bamboo splints, stitching the skin, applying turmeric paste, then wrapping the area with a cool poultice. The whole operation is quiet, reverent, almost ceremonial. Why forehead skin, someone asks. Because it's thick, close, and alive, the master replies. The gods place spare fabric near the damage zone. Historians still debate just how widespread these procedures were. Some believe they were reserved for royalty and soldiers. Others point to written evidence of rural surgeons performing similar techniques. In the 18th century, British doctors stationed in India were shocked to discover local healers successfully reconstructing noses, a practice unheard of in Europe until then. Sushruta's instructions weren't vague either. He wrote about preparing the patient with special diets, herbal treatments, and calming rituals days before surgery. A frightened body resists healing, he said. Makes sense. Your body tends to rebel when it thinks you're about to move your forehead to your face. As the morning wears on, you practice stitching banana leaf to leather. The sutures must be tight, but not choking. Precise, but flexible. It's harder than it looks. You keep tearing the leaf. Gentle hands, your teacher whispers. Pretend you're fixing your own regrets. You pause, needle in hand. That's weirdly profound. Then, another challenge, closing an ear tear. You're handed a lump of dough shaped like an ear, with a gash running through it. Using thread dipped in honey and neem oil, you sew from the outside inward, spiraling like the shell of a snail. When finished, you smear the wound with sandalwood paste and turmeric to cool the inflammation. A neighboring student sighs. Why is everything in surgery sticky? Because healing, you reply, is messy and full of bees. Not wrong. You take a break beneath the fig tree, watching ants carry away crumbs of sesame balls. The fig leaves whisper above, like the scalpels of the wind. You wonder how many surgeries took place right here, how many noses rebuilt, how many warriors walked away less ashamed because someone had learned to flip skin and wield patience. In the afternoon, a guest healer arrives to give a lecture on cleft palate repair. She speaks softly, demonstrating on a goat's skull how a thin piece of cartilage is grafted into the roof of the mouth. This lets the child speak, she says, without shame, without teasing. You feel the weight of it. How even then, medicine wasn't just about survival. It was about dignity. One of the most surprising reconstructions described in the texts. Eyelid repair, using small flaps from the cheek. Some surgeons managed to recreate a functioning eyelid to protect the eye from dust and light. The procedure was rare, but real. Sometimes, the master says as you pack up your kit, the most important surgeries leave no scars, just confidence. The day ends with a soft sunset, painting your bandaged dummy in golden light. You look at your stitching, messy sure, but honest. Your hands ache, your spine protests, and there's neem oil under your fingernails. But you feel strangely proud. You lie in your cot later, eyes fluttering shut, and imagine a parade of reconstructed noses marching past in the moonlight. Each one nods to you with thanks. You snort, almost waking yourself up, rebuilding faces, rebuilding lives, and all with a few strips of skin, a needle, and the quiet stubbornness of someone who refused to leave others broken. You wake to the scent of roasted sesame seeds and the faint echo of snoring from 3 different students, all of whom fell asleep mid-suture practice. You step over them carefully. No need to wake someone who's halfway through a dream about being praised by Sushruta himself. Today the sky is overcast. A good omen, according to the older physicians. Soft light calms the nerves, one says as he mixes a bowl of what looks suspiciously like mashed lentils and lavender. You don't ask. Today's lesson is a strange one, less dramatic than nose-flipping or cauterizing goat meat, but far more common. We're diving into the quietly heroic world of wound care. Because even the finest scalpel skills mean nothing if the wound festers like last week's fish stew. You begin by learning to cleanse. Ancient Indian surgeons took this part seriously. Boiled water infused with neem, turmeric, or bark extracts was used to wash injuries before and after surgery. Sometimes honey was mixed in, not for taste, but for its antibacterial properties. You've heard of honey's healing powers, but now you're asked to rub it directly onto a wound replica. It smells oddly soothing. Is this dessert or medicine? You mutter. Sometimes both. Your teacher shrugs. Next, you study herbal salves, the real stars of the show. These are applied post-surgery or to infected cuts. One mixture includes ghee, rock salt, licorice root, and copper ash. It's heated until thick, then spread over bandages made of clean cotton or, in poorer regions, banana leaves or bark. Historians still argue whether these methods were mostly symbolic or genuinely medicinal. But modern studies show that many of these ingredients do have antimicrobial or anti-inflammatory effects. Copper, for instance, disrupts bacterial membranes. And turmeric? It's practically the Beyoncé of ancient medicine, everywhere and always effective. The salves weren't randomly chosen either. In the Sushruta Samhita, wounds are classified into 6 types, each requiring a different kind of treatment. Incised, lacerated, contused, crushed, punctured, and bitten. Yes, bitten. Apparently wild dogs and tigers weren't uncommon visitors in some villages. There's even a chapter on treating bite wounds of jealous men, which is oddly specific. You're shown how to pack a puncture wound using grita, medicated ghee, and crushed bar powder. The mixture is cool and dense. It seeps slowly into the fake injury like molasses on a lazy afternoon. The instructor whispers, "Every wound tells a story." But if you listen right, it also tells you how to heal it. You nod, pretending that makes sense. Then you realize it actually kind of does. Next comes bandaging. You'd think this would be straightforward. It is not. There are 14 different wrapping styles detailed in the ancient texts, each based on the wound's shape, location, and depth. Spiral wrapping for limbs. Cross lattice for joints. Shoe knot bandage for the foot. You try each one on a wooden training dummy. Your cross lattice ends up looking more like a tangled laundry line. Still, the teacher says acceptable. If you were treating a scarecrow, you move on to leech therapy, a surprisingly important part of wound treatment. Medicinal leeches were used to draw out bad blood and reduce inflammation. Today, you're only watching the process, but it's mesmerizing. The leech latches with eerie confidence, swells like a grape, and then drops off with the grace of a drunken thespian. The patient seems unbothered. Do they always let go on their own? You ask. Usually, unless they fall in love, someone jokes. Speaking of love, you learn about psychological healing too. Ancient physicians believed in treating the mind alongside the body. Patients were often soothed with music, mantra recitations, or calming scents like sandalwood and jasmine. One passage in the Samhita even suggests that cheerful conversation helps wounds close faster. So naturally, today's practice involves telling a joke while rewrapping a bandage. You attempt one. Why did the surgeon bring turmeric to the party? Because it spices up everything, even stitches. Crickets. Well, it's a sleepy crowd. By midday, you're coated in salve, honey sweat, and the lingering guilt of that failed joke. You sit under the neem tree, sipping warm water infused with cloves. A gentle wind plays with the pages of your notes. You flip to a diagram of wound progression, how an untreated abscess turns to sepsis. It's beautifully illustrated, with arrows and color coding, as if drawn by someone who really wanted you to care. And you do. It's oddly moving to realize that 2,000 years ago, someone took the time to write, sketch, and label all of this, not just for posterity, but so you could help another human suffer a little less. One curious detail catches your eye. Ant trails were sometimes monitored near patient beds. If ants gathered in excess, it might indicate pus or infection in the bandage. That's right, tiny six-legged diagnostics. Primitive? Maybe. Ingenious? Absolutely. By late afternoon, your instructor calls for a final practical, wrapping a mock injury on a live partner. You're paired with a fellow student who, just for fun, pretends to faint every time you approach. "Don't make me suture your pride," you whisper. You perform the dressing calmly, applying cool neem salve, layering the cotton with the spiral wrap, and securing the final knot gently behind the knee. Your partner raises an eyebrow. Actually decent. You bow dramatically. Tell your fake injury, "I accept thanks in sesame sweets." That night, you fall asleep replaying bandage knots in your mind. Over, under, pull tight. Not too tight. The rhythm is comforting. It's a quiet reminder that sometimes healing doesn't need drama, just time, attention, and the right kind of honey. You wake to the sound of a goat nibbling on your manuscript. Again, it's early, and the sky is just starting to shift from dark blue to that soft pink-orange hue that always makes you feel like you're living inside a painting. Today's lesson takes place in a shaded pavilion near the river, far enough from the surgical theater that you start to hope it'll be something easy. Maybe foot massage techniques, or a seminar on how not to faint when someone sneezes blood. But no, today is foreign body removal. That's right, all the lovely, squirm-inducing ways ancient Indian surgeons fished things out of the human body that had no business being there. Thorns, arrows, stones, splinters, broken bones, jewelry, snakes. Okay, not snakes. But there's a vivid passage in the Sushruta Samhita about extracting a fishbone from someone's throat using a curved probe. You gulp instinctively. You begin by practicing on fruits, soft mangoes injected with dried thorns. Using hooked instruments, you're taught to feel the path of resistance, slide along the grain of the flesh, and lift the foreign object without tearing the pulp. This technique, called annuloma, is one of the oldest recorded examples of tissue-respecting surgery. It means moving with the natural lines of the body, rather than against them. Kind of like combing tangled hair, gently instead of yanking it with a stick. Historians still argue whether Sushrutas' teachings on this technique directly influenced later Greco-Roman or Islamic surgical manuals, or if they simply arrived at similar conclusions by poking enough mangoes. You shift from fruit to flesh, not real, thankfully. Today's dummy has a resin arm embedded with simulated arrows and glass shards. The instructor explains that many battlefield wounds weren't clean piercings. Arrows might break off halfway, or splinters of wood could burrow into muscle. Removal had to be precise, too quick, and you risked hemorrhage. Too slow, an infection was a guarantee. There's also the matter of wind. No, not that kind. In Ayurveda, the body's life energies are composed of three forces: Veda, wind/air, Pitta, fire, and Kapha, water/earth. Surgery disturbs these. So after any extraction, patients were given herbal tonics to settle the Veda, usually warm drinks with ginger, cardamom, and ghee. So yes, after someone yanked an arrow out of your leg, you'd be offered a spicy milk tea. Modern? No. Comforting? Inexplicably. You move on to tools. The ancient Indian surgeon's toolkit had over 100 instruments, many made from iron or bronze. Hooks, forceps, scoops, and what looks like a medieval spork. You're handed a pair of salaka, slender metal rods used for exploring sinus tracts and abscesses. They feel cool in your hand, oddly elegant. Almost like calligraphy pens, except these trace infection, not poetry. You perform a mock procedure on a wax head with a nosebleed complication. The goal? Remove a dried clot without pushing it deeper. The solution? Warm sesame oil, a careful angle, and what can only be described as surgical chopsticks. There's even an ancient technique for removing insect from the ear, a real problem back then. You soak a cloth in honey and gently wave it near the ear canal. The insect, lured by the scent, sometimes crawls out on its own. You try not to imagine the scenarios where that didn't work. There's a brief lecture on dental foreign bodies. You learn that betel nut chewing caused quite a few issues, impacted teeth, gum lesions, even embedded fragments. Sushruta described using a tooth key-shaped tool to extract them, which looked terrifying even by historical standards. You glance across the pavilion and see your fellow student trying to pull a pebble out of a dummy's ear using nothing but hopeful thinking and a spoon. You need the curved probe, you whisper. I need a new career, she replies. For a brief moment, you imagine the ancient world in its full chaos. Battlefield surgeons working by lamplight, priests reciting mantras while holding down thrashing patients, and some poor guy yelling, "I told you not to nap in the anthill." That's when you're handed a real case. An elderly merchant with a thorn stuck in his heel from stepping on a temple floor mat. He's calm, almost amused. "Don't faint, young one," he says, smiling. "I still have another foot." You prep the area with warm oil, inspect the angle, and gently guide the curved probe in. The thorn comes out like a thread from old cloth. You bandage the wound, offer him sandalwood balm, and wish him well. He winks. You make a good cobbler, too. That night, you dream of odd things. Talking scalpels, mangoes that scream, a beetle in your ear quoting Sushruta, and underneath it all, the comforting rhythm of movement. Insert hook, lift heel. The sun is high now, filtering through fabric awnings and dappling the courtyard in patches of golden green. A breeze carries the scent of turmeric, sandalwood, and, less pleasantly, boiled gauze. You stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, and brace yourself. Today's lesson is the one everyone's been both dreading and morbidly anticipating. Surgical procedures on the eyes and ears. Your teacher begins by holding up a small, sharp knife, the kind with a blade so fine it looks like it could split a hair. "This," he says, "is the Jalakavakarani, or, as I like to call it, the last thing you'll ever want near your eyeball." Your classmates chuckle uneasily. You do too, but then you realize he's only half joking. First up, cataract surgery. Yes, cataracts, those cloudy, lens-blurring invaders, were not only recognized but also treated in ancient India, nearly 2,000 years before modern ophthalmology had its moment. The technique is called couching, and it involves inserting a needle-like instrument into the eye and pushing the clouded lens down and out of the line of vision. You're told it doesn't remove the cataract so much as shoo it into a less annoying spot. Effective? Sometimes. Dangerous? Always. Especially without anesthesia. Historians still argue whether couching should be considered a breakthrough or a horror show. But what's undeniable is that it spread. Traces of the method pop up in ancient China, Persia, and even Rome. Whether they borrowed it from Sutures' teachings or stumbled onto it independently remains debated. Today, of course, no one's couching any real eyeballs. You're handed a carved gourd with a painted pupil and tasked with practicing precision insertions using a sliver-thin probe. You can't help but flinch every time the point comes close. It's less like surgery and more like playing Operation on hard mode with a side of existential dread. You shift to the ears, secretly relieved. That relief vanishes when you see the wax models, some featuring fungal infections, others sporting what looks like a small forest of overgrown hair and crusted scabs. You're told these represent common conditions in humid regions. Great. Your task? Treating otitis externa, outer ear infections, using techniques from the Sushruta Samhita. The protocol involves cleansing the canal with warm medicated oil, followed by the careful insertion of a small wick soaked in camphor and ghee. It's meant to soothe inflammation and draw out pus. Not glamorous, but incredibly effective for its time. You move on to something trickier, ruptured eardrums. The text actually warns against tampering too much, instead recommending a regimen of rest, herbal oils, and minimal noise exposure. Imagine that. 600 BCE noise-canceling therapy. And then there's the section you hoped was just a joke, surgery for ear enlargement. In some regions, elongated earlobes were considered beautiful. If someone's natural anatomy didn't oblige, there were procedures, yes, surgical procedures involving incisions, small spacers, and repeated applications of healing balms like sesame oil and turmeric paste. Your teacher nods solemnly as you examine a wax dummy with lobe extensions the size of bangles. This, too, he says, is medicine for the soul. You try to respond, but mostly you just stare. In between practices, you learn about headaches, specifically those tied to sinus congestion and bad air trapped in the skull. Ancient Indian medicine believed such pain could be relieved by nausea, the inhalation of herbal fumes through the nostrils. Kind of like a neti pot, but with added chilly vapor and divine chanting. You try it. You cry a little, but your sinuses have never been clearer. One of the final cases is especially odd. A woman complaining of phantom buzzing in her ear, even though there's no visible cause. The instructor calls it a Veda disturbance and prescribes a mix of warm ghee, Brahmi oil, and chanting. And if that fails, he adds, you marry her off to a quiet village. You're not sure whether that's medical advice or social commentary. You take a moment to appreciate how advanced all this is. The meticulous observation, the trial and error, the attempts at holistic care. Despite lacking microscopes, bacteria theory, or even a concept of sterility, these surgeons treated the sensory organs, the most delicate parts of the body, with something approximating modern finesse. And now here you are, poking a painted gourd with a glorified hat pin, trying not to sneeze while a simulated ear drips herbal oil onto your sandal. This is your life now. And, weirdly, you're kind of into it. It's your final week in the surgical academy. And by now you've learned to expect the unexpected, though even that doesn't prepare you for what today holds. Reconstructive surgery. Yes, plastic surgery. In ancient India, over 2,000 years ago, you find yourself standing under the same neem tree where you once practiced bandaging clay dummies. Now listening to your teacher recount stories of nose reconstructions using a technique called rhinoplasty, which, brace yourself, involve forehead skin. The story goes like this. Due to a strict code of honor in ancient Indian culture, Punishments for crimes like adultery or betrayal often included the amputation of the nose. A harsh but symbolic act. And yet, where there's shame, there's always a surgeon with a solution. The Suture Samhita contains the earliest written instructions for reconstructing a nose using a flap of skin from the patient's forehead. It's called the paramedian forehead flap technique. And get this, it's still used in modern reconstructive surgery. Historians still argue whether Sushruta actually invented the technique or merely compiled it from generations of practice. But his version was the first to make it into medical text. You practice on banana leaves and rolled cloth, forming what they call mock flaps. You trace the incisions. 2 vertical cuts on the forehead, flip down over a cartilage mold, often made from tree bark back then, and stitched to the remnants of the nasal bridge. Then the flap was left attached at the top, like a skin umbilical cord, so the blood supply stayed intact while healing. It's clever, brutal, and, in some oddly elegant way, humane. Your teacher adds, "We didn't do it to erase mistakes. We did it to restore honor." And then, to your horror, he says, "Now, pair up." You're handed a small gourd, a strip of goat leather, and a needle shaped like a miniature sickle. For the next hour, you and your partner simulate nasal reconstruction while trying not to slice your thumbs. The process involves constant wetting of the flap to prevent cracking, a lesson hard learned by surgeons in dry seasons. Later, there's a lecture on ear and lip reconstruction. Torn lobes from earrings, cleft lips, and battle injuries were surprisingly common, especially among warriors and dancers. In some cases, herbal pastes were used to soften scar tissue before recutting and reshaping the area. There's even a procedure described for grafting skin over an open wound using lotus petals as a sterile dressing layer. Soft, soothing, and sacred. You also study burn treatment, a crucial part of reconstructive healing. Ancient texts mention cooling salves made from sandalwood paste, aloe, honey, and, because nothing in India is ever under-seasoned, turmeric. Bandages were changed daily, and leeches were sometimes used to reduce congestion and swelling. Yes, again with the leeches. As the day winds down, you sit in on a case consultation. A sculptor lost the tip of his nose in a kiln accident. His request? "Give me back my shadow." You don't understand what he means until he turns his head in the sunset, and you see the flat spot where the bridge of his nose used to be. The surgeon agrees to try. You assist in prepping the skin flap. You can't help but think, these hands, yours, were once too clumsy to peel fruit without destroying it. And now you're drawing blood with purpose. The surgery takes hours. It will take weeks to heal. But when it's over, the sculptor cries. Not because of pain, but because, once again, he casts a profile. That night, you lie on your mat, staring at the rafters. You think about noses and shame and the strange tenderness that blooms between healer and healed. You think about the temple dancer with her torn earlobe and the boy with the burned shoulder. And you realize, medicine here isn't about perfection. It's about restoration. About offering people the chance to be seen, whole, once more. Even if their nose is technically made of forehead. You're woken at dawn by a faint but unmistakable sound. Chanting, low and rhythmic, like waves lapping against a shore of ancient syllables. The air smells faintly of ghee and incense. Today is Ritual Medicine Day, and even though your practical brain rolls its metaphorical eyes, your tired body is oddly intrigued. You shuffle into the learning courtyard and see your teacher seated cross-legged beside a series of bronze vessels, herbs, and tiny fire pits. A large palm leaf manuscript rests beside him, weighted down with smooth stones. There's no bandaging practice today, no surgical tools, no lectures on anatomical diagrams. Instead, you'll be learning the other side of medicine, the spiritual side. To your surprise, the Suture Samhita devotes entire chapters to mental health, dreams, spiritual imbalance, and ritual cleansing. Historians still debate whether these practices were scientific attempts at psychosomatic care or sincere religious treatments. Probably both. Either way, it's fascinating. First up, mantra therapy. The belief was simple. Though deeply layered, sound has healing power. Specific vibrations, when chanted in a steady rhythm, could supposedly rebalance your inner elements. This applied especially to illnesses deemed to have no physical cause: chronic anxiety, inexplicable fatigue, even insomnia. Your assignment? To chant a Sanskrit verse for mind cooling while grinding sandalwood paste with a stone pestle. Your arms ache after 10 minutes, but your mind, unexpectedly, feels lighter. Now, your teacher says, rub that paste on your temples and do nothing for an hour. You do, and somehow you fall asleep sitting up. You wake to bells and birds and a second round of ritual training. Aromatic fumigation, or dapana. This involves heating specific herbs like neem, turmeric, frankincense over coals to produce cleansing smoke. It was used to purify sick rooms, cleanse surgical tools, pre-boiling, and even chase away what they believed to be evil winds, malignant spiritual forces that caused infection or madness. One student coughs violently during the first round. Another gets teary-eyed. You feel slightly euphoric, like you just cleaned your whole apartment without lifting a finger. Then there's dream interpretation, which you weren't expecting. Patients who experienced repetitive, unsettling dreams were often believed to suffer from mental or spiritual imbalance, especially if paired with real symptoms like nausea or fever. Sushruta advised not just herbs, but also guided sleep, a sort of proto-hypnotherapy involving soft music, scented oils, and whispered prayers. You reenact a consultation. Your partner pretends to be a merchant plagued by dreams of falling into a pit of fire ants. You suggest sandalwood vapor, a garlic detox diet, and sleeping facing east. Everyone laughs, lightly, but your teacher nods in approval. Sometimes, he says, being listened to is the most healing act of all. Midday brings the more unusual practices. A cow is led into the courtyard. Yes, a real one. You're told this is for Panchagavya therapy, which includes using 5 products from the cow: milk, curd, ghee, urine, and dung. You're not required to taste anything, thankfully, but you do assist in preparing a cleansing balm made from ghee and cow urine boiled with herbs. Supposedly, this was used to treat stubborn skin diseases. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic placebos or genuinely effective, especially considering how many modern antibiotics derive from ancient plant extracts. But either way, you're beginning to understand something vital. Ancient Indian medicine wasn't just about cutting and stitching. It was about connection between the body and the world, the healer and the healed, the visible wound and the invisible force behind it. As evening falls, you help light small clay lamps along the courtyard's edge. The smoke drifts upward like the tail of a sleepy dragon. You dab a dot of ash on your forehead, as instructed, and recline on a straw mat while listening to the final chant of the day. The fire crackles. Someone snores softly, and you think, maybe this is the medicine that works when nothing else does. You wake the next morning to find a rolled scroll beside your mat, an invitation of sorts. Today marks the culmination of your apprenticeship. It's not a test exactly, but more of a proving ground, a public demonstration, a chance to show your understanding not only of tools and technique, but of something more ephemeral: presence. The scroll reads, "Today, you become a Vaidya not through incision, but through intention." You're not entirely sure what that means, but you're nervous anyway. You join the other apprentices in the outer garden, where a small crowd of townspeople has gathered. There are woven mats spread across the grass, and sitting cross-legged on each one is a patient with a real or simulated ailment. You're told to choose someone and begin. You pick a weaver complaining of chronic hand cramps, possibly real, possibly exaggerated for drama. Either way, it's your case now. You begin by examining his fingers, gently bending and tapping, listening to the subtle pops in the knuckles. You mix a paste of sesame oil, garlic, and black pepper, ingredients believed to stimulate nerve endings, and massage it into the palm with a slow, circular motion. It's not glamorous. It's not surgical, but it feels like medicine. You then prepare a medicated ghee compress, warmed over coals and wrapped in fine cotton, and press it gently into the crook of his wrist. Your patient lets out a low sigh that you take as a good sign. A teacher passes by and whispers, "You're not fixing his fingers. You're giving him his livelihood back." Next up, diagnosis by observation. Your patient is a young woman who has been fainting during temple rituals. She claims to be cursed, but you know better. Her pulse is erratic, her pupils sluggish. You suspect dehydration, possibly anemia, and prescribe a cooling brew of sugarcane juice, licorice root, and powdered pearl ash, a remedy mentioned in a fringe commentary of the Charaka Samhita. Historians still argue whether these pearl-based remedies actually worked, or whether it was the belief itself that stabilized the patient. In your case, she finishes half the drink, then excuses herself to use the toilet, a promising sign of rehydration, if not elegance. The day wears on. You check a boy's jaw alignment after a fall. It's fine. Recommend neem bark chewing sticks for a grandmother with bleeding gums. And even get roped into making an herbal poultice for an ox with a nasty hoof scrape. By sunset, your robe is stained with turmeric, your fingers smell like camphor, and your shoulders ache, but you're oddly content. Your teacher finally gathers everyone near the ceremonial neem tree. He looks over each apprentice, then hands you a strip of dyed cotton, deep saffron, the color of practiced knowledge. Tied around your wrist, he says, not to show off, but to remind yourself, healing is service. Then he adds, "Now go wash your hands. You smell like pickled herbs." You laugh because it's true. That night, there's a small feast, spiced lentils, honeyed rice, roasted lotus root. You sit beside the patient you treated earlier, who thanks you not for curing him, but for listening. "No one's touched my hands like that since my mother," he says quietly. Later, when the courtyard is empty, you walk alone to the sacred fire pit. You toss a few dried rose petals into the ashes because you can, because it feels like closure. The stars blink lazily above you, as if dozing off themselves, and you realize the journey that began with sutures and anxious questions has led you here to competence, maybe even confidence. You're not a miracle worker, but you're a witness, a companion, a guide through pain and back again. You head to your mat and stretch out, limbs warm from the day's rituals, eyes heavy with the weight of wisdom. Your wrist smells faintly of saffron and ash. And somehow, in this quiet night, with no ceremony, no fanfare, you have become a healer. Sleep does not come quickly, but it comes gently. You lie beneath the wide, velvety sky, your breath synchronized with the whispering rustle of banyan leaves overhead. Somewhere nearby, a night lizard chirps, and an oil lamp flickers on its last ounce of wick. You reflect, because that's what nights like this are for. You remember the ant mandibles and your clumsy first attempts to line them up along a wound. You think about the herbal brews that smelled like wet socks but calmed real fevers. You chuckle to yourself about the time someone dropped a scalpel into a vat of boiling ghee. You're glad you weren't that someone. Okay, you were. But the thought that holds you longest is this. How did they know so much with so little? They didn't have microscopes or labs or printed manuals. And yet, they knew that the body needed balance. They knew when to cut and when to wait. They knew that fear is a fever of the soul, and that sometimes a gentle touch is more potent than any potion. It's humbling. You recall a passage your teacher once murmured while bandaging a boy's fractured arm. Medicine is not the act of healing. It is the art of returning someone to themselves. At the time, you rolled your eyes. Now you see it. The surgical knowledge, the ligatures, the dissection techniques, the salves, that was only half of it. The rest came from observation, from quiet, from noticing. Like the way a patient flinches before you even touch their wound, or the way they exhale in relief when you ask about their dreams instead of their pulse. There was even a ritual to observe your own hands before operating. You'd hold them out, palm up, and ask yourself, will these bring harm or harmony today? Historians still argue whether this was mere superstition or an ancient form of mindfulness training. You're inclined to think it was both. Because the more you study, the more you realize ancient Indian medicine didn't just treat the body, it respected it. Not as a malfunctioning machine, but as a delicate, divine instrument that occasionally forgets its own rhythm. And your job? To hum that rhythm back into being. As the fire dies to glowing coals, your thoughts soften into memories, faces of patients, teachers, even that cranky ox with the hoof scrape. You begin to drift. But before the world blurs completely, your hand brushes something beside your mat. It's the anthill model you built weeks ago. Its tiny channels and hollow ridges catch the moonlight. You smile, because what began as a curiosity, a squeamish fascination with bug sutures, has led you through a quiet labyrinth of science, spirit, and sleep. You are quite officially historically sleepy. Word count, 1015. Wind down. And now, wherever you are, whether tucked in bed in a tiny studio apartment or curled up under layered quilts with a window cracked open, just let the remnants of tonight's tale settle like soft dust around you. The sounds of temple bells, the rustle of palm leaf scrolls, the flickering hush of oil lamps, all distant echoes now, soothing in their smallness. Your body still and heavy. Your breath slower than before. You don't need to remember the Sanskrit terms or how to align an ant's jaw with a wound. Just let the feeling remain of ancient hands doing quiet work, of warm herbs on skin, of time unspooling slowly like a silken thread. You're not in a clinic or a classroom anymore. You're in that in-between world where memory becomes dream and dream becomes rest. Let go of the calendar, the notifications, the to-do list stacked high. Let yourself dissolve into this gentle history where nothing is urgent and everything is ancient. You're safe. You're warm. You're exactly where you need to be. Sleep well, healer of the past. Sweet dreams.